As the prophet of esports, I rely on trustworthy and meaningful data every day. Data from our research partner YouGov offers the most complete view of esports fans and gamers in the world, providing context to who they are, what they think, the brands they buy, and things they do. YouGov's connected insights and research services inform strategy at every level. If you're a team, a brand, agency, or rights holder, you should be talking with YouGov. Their partners measure and maximize ROI and are telling compelling stories with data. Visit yougov.com/gaming-esports to learn more.
I think a great spot, but you make two interesting points, Lindsay. One is the 6 months number. I didn't realize came out of an interview, right? Or a question asked by a journalist. Like, of course, what is the CEO of a company going to say, right? Oh no, we like threw this out the last second, right? I had this idea on the way to work and then we just did it. Like, of course they're going to say, oh no, this is thoughtful. You know, we've been doing this, working on this for 6 months. Of course. Now, is that the reality? My guess, probably not. I think this was knee-jerk reaction. Now, where I give them credit is I have a funny feeling Sony doesn't stop here. And this is maybe to Jeff's point, which is like, if you'd rather have in this mad scenario, right, this mutually assured destruction scenario, you need a bigger knife. Maybe Bungie was just the first, you build the small nuke first, even though you're going to build, an arsenal of bigger nukes eventually. Does Sony have the conviction, the will, the cash? Like, I'm curious from a business standpoint, is a Sony EA move likely? Could we see Sony and Nintendo maybe? A Japanese company may be able to finally crack the Nintendo nut. I don't know.
But there's a lot of corporate history between those two companies that I don't know that would work.
The question is, does the Sony EA work from a financial standpoint?
It probably does. I mean, I guess I think you would have a very interesting math problem to figure out if it made sense to make the sports games exclusive. I'm not convinced that it does. At some point, actually, this is it. At some point, the more games that go exclusive to one of the two platforms, it makes less sense to make games exclusive, right? And I'll explain the reason why. The reason why you make some games exclusive, right, is so you get people to buy your hardware. But really, the why you want them to buy your hardware is not just to get the revenue from the hardware, because that's pretty low margin. Actually, most of them give the hardware out at cost. You want to get them on your platform so that the other third-party games are bought on your platform, and you make like a 30% basically margin right off the top. It's 100% flows to the bottom line. If there are no more third-party games, then you sort of lose the benefit of that. So it's almost like I don't know that it makes sense to buy something and then put it all only on your platform, because you lose sort of the pie at the end of the the gold at the end of the rainbow if there are no third-party publishers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're saying if they all get bought up, then
what are you looking to win?
The Cold War's over, essentially. Right?
Yeah.
It
becomes World War I. They're just in like two trenches, like not moving, and just like killing one another, basically. To use that and go to a different war.
Adam says no one wants to buy EA, too bad a reputation. I mean, Adam, I'd agree with you, except that we saw Activision Blizzard in the middle of one of the worst like scandals in gaming history get bought for a huge amount. So I don't know if that would deter Sony, to be honest. Adam says, I'll bet Microsoft tried to buy EA, but they were like, we'll go partners with you on Game Pass instead. That's an interesting thought in the sense that, my guess is Microsoft would definitely have preferred a partnership path with Game Pass, right? Like if they knew everyone would play ball on Game Pass, Microsoft wouldn't need to really acquire anyone. Do you guys agree with that? In a perfect world for Microsoft, where every developer says, I'm okay putting my games on Game Pass, Does Microsoft need to own any developers?
I don't.
I mean, that's
think,
like saying,
I think
why
you're
does
right.
Netflix need to to have first party studios?
Because
Well,
people are
because
making their own content and putting it on their own platforms.
yeah, exactly.
It's a good,
Because
So-
they don't.
good
Not
answer.
everyone wants their stuff on
Yeah.
Netflix.
I think you're actually right. And one of the reasons why is just because they have pushed Game Pass as their kind of biggest strategy lately. If they were maybe less interested in Game Pass and more interested in game sales, or indicated that they had more faith in game sales, then I would say that they needed a developer. But given their push for Game Pass, then if everyone just used Game Pass, I think they'd be fine with it.
Yeah, they wouldn't need to own. Jane, welcome, Jane. Says the deal may have been in the works for a while, but the timing of the press release may have been knee-jerk. That's an excellent
Very
point,
true.
right? It is an excellent point. Greg says all the major tech companies are fighting over sports coverage. Wouldn't EA make sense as a follow-on? Greg, for who? For Sony? Sony.
I think he means for Apple or Netflix.
Yeah.
Or
I still feel like
Google
Apple
or
is the number one. Like
Amazon.
But even
Amazon actually
Sony-
makes the most sense. Amazon.
Well, we've talked about that, but even Sony, well, you could make that argument. They have like TV production and movie studios and all those kinds of things, right? Like, I mean, they're in the TV and entertainment business beyond just games. Adam says, I could see Sony and EA doing another partnership when it comes to their new Star Wars games, but I don't see EA being bought.
Ooh, disagree. I think it's a waiting game for EA.
Yeah. I'd like to. I agree with you, Lindsay. I think it is inevitable. It feels inevitable at this point. Michael says EA isn't
So
as
you guys
attractive
are really
anymore.
in the mindset, before you read this, you're really in the
sorry.
mindset that there will be no more independent, just third party publishers.
No, that's not. I mean,
Like large.
it's like the
'Cause
life
if EA
cycle
gets
of
bought-
industries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If EA gets bought, then it's just Take-Two and the CD Projekt Red would be the only ones left.
Yeah, but who's to say that you won't get upstarts that grow into larger companies, right? That have hits that eventually become Ubisoft scale, EA scale, whatever's like Bethesda scale. Like, I don't think it's that crazy to think that there's probably a dozen developers today, indie, called them indie or smaller, like startup scale developers that will grow to be Bethesda or Ubisoft or Bungie scale. Definitely Bungie scale. I mean, you wouldn't have hundreds of millions of venture money going to game developers if they didn't think that we were going to have some, multi-billion-dollar exits there.
Agreed. And to be fair, if you would have asked me a month ago, I would never have thought Activision was going to get sold. So, we are living in crazy times. You're probably right. It just still haven't wrapped my brain around it.
I actually read a bit about antitrust and horizontal versus vertical mergers, and the ones so far have seemed to be more vertical, which does typically increase competition and innovation within the space. So if game publishers were buying other game publishers, I think I would have a different reaction. And I know tech and gaming are definitely periphery. They're tangentially related. They're not purely the same though. Adding a big tech company could add layers of bureaucracy, but it also adds a lot more manpower and investment dollars and infrastructure and all of that stuff that could actually lead to some innovation with larger publishers that have been more stagnant for a while. So we'll see.
It's a great point. Michael says EA isn't as attractive anymore because they are ending their contract with the FIFA brand, which is their main revenue. I think Sony will make the next move, but this war will become a Royal Rumble. More giants like Google and Tencent might join. So, Michael, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I was just going to say, and you can respond if you want. I don't agree with the first part. I definitely agree with the last part. Well, maybe not Google, because I think they already shot their shot and they're backing off. Tencent, I mean, we've seen them be an aggregator for years. I think it would be very hard politically for them to make a big acquisition, but they're always going to be there putting their games out and kind of encroaching into the West. In terms of the FIFA thing, EA is not going to not have a soccer game. It's just they're not going to call it FIFA, which I think is incredibly smart, because apparently they're paying something like $150 million a year to license that. Like, you can't tell me if it was called EA Soccer, you wouldn't buy it. Like, it's going to be the same game. You're not going to go buy the Konami version or whatever the other competitors are. Like, To me, I see that as a very smart move. To some extent, I think they could probably do it also with Madden. I know obviously John Madden just died, so it would be really crass of them to do it now. Like they need to wait a few years, obviously, but like they're paying like an egregious
He's
amount.
dead. Rename this thing.
Yeah, like people know what these games are. Like you could just call it EA Football, and like you're gonna get the same amount of people. You don't have to pay John Madden $30 million a year. Like it just doesn't. You don't need to. The only question with FIFA is like, what do you call it? Because you can't call it soccer, right? Because you sell so much internationally, and you can't call it football because then people get confused with Madden. So I do think there's like you're gonna have to come up with some word there. Like that's the only thing on that where I'm like, I don't know what they'll call it. Maybe they'll call it football, like FUT, whatever, in overseas and soccer here. But other than that, it makes no sense to go with the FIFA brand. You're just throwing money out that I don't think you need for branding purposes.
Yeah, I'll just chime in on the Royal Rumble thing. Like I think a big part of the focus here on these acquisitions is around exclusives. And so this is where Sony and Microsoft are going to have to dig deep and spend a lot of dollars because they're the US and Russia in this Cold War analogy, right? Google and Tencent do not aren't in that same head to head, right? There's the console war is driving a lot of the actions here and a lot of the acquisitions happening here. So I'm not saying that other tech companies aren't going to throw their hats in the ring. Definitely, we're going to see acquisitions from other tech companies of gaming companies. But I think Sony and Microsoft, by June or July, we're still going to be talking about those as being some of the bigger acquisitions, if not the biggest.